listed.
My Lords, I join others in thanking the Noble Lord Polack for securing this debate. One of my fellow peers here today expressed some surprise at my presence, given the range of other topics on which I engage. And of course, if we had more Greens in the House, you'd hear from me less, and I'd be very happy with that. But I do have a particular interest in Iran that dates back many years, to when I looked academically at the place of feminist movements within Iran in the fall of the Shah, and it was a major one for those who are unaware of that, and the way in which they were viciously swept aside by what became the current theocratic regime. And there's also, of course, my encounters as a journalist in 20-plus years, much of it in international news, with this region, which were numerous. One of the reasons why I always knew that I would leave journalism is the same cyclical, depressing, disastrous, deadly stories came round again and again and again, and eventually you reach the stage where that's very hard to take. I also think that the Green perspective on foreign affairs, international affairs, is a different one that can offer some useful perspectives on this debate, and that also line up with what you might describe as some more mainstream perspectives. One of those is the fact that we believe that everything is linked to everything else, which makes a 5-minute speech very difficult, but that it's impossible to just look at one issue as a cog in a machine and say we fix that without acknowledging the entire context in which it's operating. So I was looking before this debate in some very interesting detailed work from Chatham House, which is calling for a, quote, JCPOA plus process that must lengthen and strengthen the deal. And with this, I agree with the Noble Lord, Lord Lamont, that this is not an instead of situation, but a in addition to arrangement. Regional challenges must be managed through multilateral negotiating tracks. That means we have to think about the context of the wars in Yemen and Syria, building greater solidarity among Gulf Cooperation Councils, the Israel-Palestine conflict, and the creation of meaningful confidence-building measures. And I think we have to think about the place of the UK in all of this rather differently to we traditionally and perhaps still do. Humbly, acknowledging our tremendously difficult history in the region and the continuing situation of issues such as UK arms sales to Saudi Arabia. Now, I also want to put this in the context of a feminist foreign policy, and it may surprise this committee, it certainly rather surprised me that the last time I talked about a feminist foreign policy in the House, it was actually something of a hit on TikTok, which was not something I expected. But I think that's a sign of the world really looking for different ways of looking at our international situation, given where we are now. So what does that mean? It means a fundamental shift away from a total focus on hard security, nuclear issues, military weapons issues, to thinking about the environment, hunger, pandemic relief. And I think it's really worth looking at the context of the region. The MENA region has 50 million undernourished people. The climate emergency and the crisis of water supplies press particularly hard across this whole region. 2/3 of its food is imported. We think about what we know about the global food security situation now. SDG 2, zero hunger, looks further away by the day. Iran imports sunflower oil, wheat, corn, barley and soya beans from Russia and Ukraine, predominantly Russia. It's had 30% less rainfall. It's had much less rainfall and yields are expected to be 30% down this year. It's impossible to just look at nuclear without looking at all of this context. And the other side of a feminist foreign policy is that it's important to focus on women's rights. And that's particularly true in the context of Iran, given its hideous record in this area. And to note that women in recent years within Iran have been at the absolute forefront of leading civil disobedience on a scale not seen since 1978 and 9, going back to where I started. And it's really important to stress that when we're talking about feminist foreign policy, that's sometimes been interpreted as the idea of us going in as saviours. Instead, let's think about the agency of women in Iran, women in the region, how they can be involved and engaged in this process. This is a matter of understanding security very broadly, and if we only look at that single cog without the total context, then we are always at risk of doing more harm than good.
It is a pleasure.